My name is Edeillas. We will be starting in a couple of minutes. Thank you for joining us. This is just a sound check, making sure that you can hear us. Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody. Just to let you know that we are about to start the seminar. I see that many of you are joining right now. My name is Edeillas, and I'll be moderating the session today. Just to let you know that we're waiting for all the panelists to connect from different countries around the world. Therefore, we'll need a couple of minutes to make that those connections are working effectively. So please bear with us. We'll be starting in a minute or two. Thank you so much for joining us today. Good morning, afternoon, and evening. I see that more people are joining. Just to let you know that we are waiting for all of the panelists to connect from different countries around the world. My name is Edeillas. I will be moderating the session today. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be starting in about 1 minute. Thank you so much. Wonderful, and I've been informed that we have all of the speakers connected. So let me first of all welcome all of you to this seminar on the webinar number 2 of the Water Adaptation Community, focus on accelerated adaptation through large-scale nature-based solutions. And everybody talks about nature-based solutions as an important component of adaptation to climate, but there are not too many experiences at large scale on nature-based solutions. And today we have a fantastic set of presentations from different regions around the world to hopefully demonstrate to everybody who is participating today that nature-based solutions are not some a small thing that is a small pilot here and there, but actually is the wave of the future. And that integration between the traditional gray infrastructure and nature-based solutions is actually the only way in which climate change is really going to operate. And we're going to be able to prevent the horrible risks that are going to take in place. So we're going to have a series of introductory remarks. First, a video from the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, Mr. Patrick Verheugen. Then we are very pleased to have with us the special advisor to the Prime Minister for Climate Change Pakistan, Mr. Malik Amin Aslam. And then we'll have a video message from the Senior Secretary of Ministry of Water Resources of Bangladesh, Mr. Kabir bin Anwar. So let me then try to get and see if we can have the first video remarks from the CEO of the Global Center of Adaptation, Patrick Verheugen. So Long, if you can proceed with the video. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, It is my great pleasure to join you all today to address this important webinar on accelerating adaptation of nature-based solutions at scale. From heat waves and hurricanes in the United States to flooding here in Europe and also in China, the extreme weather events of the past few months have shown us that globally, much of society is still not prepared for the impacts of our changing climate. Yet, nature, which underpins our well-being on so many levels, can help us fight climate change and protects us from its worst effects. It is the key to building healthier, wealthier, and more resilient economies. So nature-based solutions bring multiple benefits too. In the right place, a woodland can store carbon, reduce flood risk, provide a habitat for plants and animals, and also opportunities for recreation. Forests and wetlands can slow down the flow of floodwaters and reduce the risk of inundation. In towns and cities, such as here in Rotterdam, parks and ponds can help to do the same. Together with WWF, partner organizations and governments here at the Global Center on Adaptations, we are working on how nature-based solutions can be scaled up. For this to happen, we think three things need to unfold. One, finance. We need a 5 to 10-fold increase in adaptation finance to better manage our scarce water resources, to nature-based solutions, climate-proof all sectors from food production, power, and transport systems to building livable cities and coastlines too. We need to identify a pipeline of large-scale MBS projects that truly accelerate adaptation and at the same time build the resilience of our communities. And three, we need to build the capacity to plan and implement large-scale MBS projects so that it becomes business as usual alongside grey infrastructure in the adaptation portfolio. All of these important aspects need to be properly addressed. At the Global Center on Adaptation, our Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, a $25 billion program together with the African Development Bank and the African Union, we do exactly that. Through the African Infrastructure Resilience Accelerator, we are working to integrate MBS to make the continent's urban and rural infrastructure resilient to Africa's current and future climate. We aim to influence the annual $93 billion of infrastructure funding so that 50% is specifically targeted to enhance the climate resilience of economies and communities and to climate-proof projects. In that sense, audience today, I invite you to join in our presentation and discussion of the Water Adaptation Community, but also let us work together. We can drive nature-based solutions to scale to create a greener, more resilient, and inclusive future for all. This can be done. This must be done.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and for those opening remarks. Let me welcome those of you who have joined us in the last couple of minutes again to the second webinar of the Water Adaptation Community. And this community has been set up not only just to do webinars, but to really become a true platform of exchange of ideas, of exchange of experiences, of building a community on what are some of the most challenging topics that need a lot of learning and attention from different countries around the world. And today, one of the important topics is going to be on nature-based solutions. And actually, one of the most important ingredients, as Patrick was saying in his opening remarks and presentation. So today, we're very pleased from the Global Center on Adaptation to have this joint activity with WWF, who has been a leader on nature-based solutions. When I was working in China, they really had hundreds of activities on nature-based solutions, even before They were called in that name. So it's great to have this opportunity to work with them. So now I'm informed that there will be a little bit of a change in terms of the order. I think that we're going to have now from Bangladesh, the Senior Secretary of the Ministry of Water Resources, Mr. Kabir bin Anwar, given some opening remarks while we do some technical work to make sure that the special advisor to the Prime Minister of Pakistan on climate change can join us. So, Long, let's go and connect Mr. Anwar to hear from Bangladesh.
I'd like to give you thanks for giving me this opportunity to say something about Bangladesh and the nature-based solutions that we are trying to use. As you know, Bangladesh is a delta country. We have hundreds of thousands of rivers, wetlands, and also the Bay of Bengal, which causes small or big cyclones every year. As the climate change effect and the sea level rises, the Bangladesh is also most vulnerable and disaster prone. Nowadays, we are trying to utilize the best nature-based solutions that we could for the embankments and the dikes, for the slope protection, and as a wave breaker, we are creating mangrove forest on the coastal areas as well as in the inside Bangladesh, in the sweetwater or river banks. We are planting saplings, lots of grasses and weeds and all these things. Our land is very fertile, so we have lots of grasses, trees that can protect the soil and can reduce the erosion. We are reclaiming lands also on the coastal areas as well as inland water islands, river islands. We have decided already that the width of the bridge or the water control structure shall be equal to or more than the top water width of the canal or the river. I mean the full width of the river. Using gravitation irrigation technology, we are providing 1.3 million hectares of land, sweet water with the surface water using the gravitation irrigation technology. We have about 56 irrigation projects under which we are providing sweet water, surface water for cultivation. Whenever we are planting any saplings or trees, forestation, we are focusing on the trees, fruit trees especially, so that that can be grow as a habitat for the birds, and birds can have their food also. We are planting firewoods so that dependency upon the other valuable trees reduces. So that is how we are trying to use the nature-based solution in Bangladesh. Water is life and water is everything over here, and we are used to, we are the most vulnerable and on the other hand resilient. So using nature-based solution, we hope that we can make a better world, at least a better Bangladesh.
Mr. Anwar, thank you very much for those words. And indeed, I think that Bangladesh, given the tremendous challenges that has today and in the years to come with respect to climate change, cannot simply build with great infrastructure the solutions to tackle and to adapt. It has to be the combination of great infrastructure and nature-based solutions that are going to be critical for that. For those of you who have just joined us, welcome to this seminar of the Global Center on Adaptation and WWF, to discuss nature-based solutions that scale as an integral component of plans on adaptation. So now we're going to be moving to the 4 case presentations that come from different parts of the world. We're going to have Dr. Brehe van Wissenbeck from Deltares talking about several cases fascinating cases in Africa. Then Dr. Masood Arshad from WWF Pakistan to talk about the program called Recharge Pakistan. Then Karel Henkier from Royal Haskoning, DHV, to talk about the Mekong Delta in Asia. And then finally, an important question: how does this all get financed? So Anirudh Rajashekar from Pegasus will be talking about that. So each of them will be doing a brief presentation of 10 minutes so that we get a sense from all of them what is it that is required to do into this process. We want to be concise, but at the same time full of information. To the speakers, again, I'll remind you that I'll give you a signal at 8 minutes, and then I'll intervene at 10 to be able to have sufficient time for all the presentations to be covered and to have a fantastic panel discussion moving forward. So let me first start with Deltares to do the presentation, and while you come into the screen, Dr. Brecht van Dissewijk is an expert on ecosystem assessment and ecological data analysis with a focus on coastal and wetland ecosystem. I mean, from early ages when she did her thesis on salt marsh behavior, both in the Netherlands and in the US, is looking at these really complex interactions between ecology, hydrodynamics, and morphology. So really, we are very pleased to hear what have been the experiences of Deltares in Africa. And as I said, let's go for 10 minutes. Thank you so much, Dr. Francis. Please go ahead.
Yes, here I am. Thank you, Ede. I was struggling to find the unmute button. Can you?
We can hear you very well. Please go ahead.
Great.
And we can also see the slides. So you are good to go.
Great, then I can. Yeah, I will try to present 3 cases in this little time. So as was already said, nature-based solutions can actually be applied in several environments, right? It can be applied from dry lands to riverine environments to coastal environments, and also in city. And in all these environments, we can actually work with nature in a better way than we have been doing in the past by integrating nature in development plans and in infrastructure development. However, this comes with a challenge, of course. And the challenge is not only for nature-based solution, but it's a challenge for how we do infrastructure in general and how we do it well. So where do we apply hard infrastructure? Where do we apply nature-based solutions? And how do we take care that it actually functions in the way that we mean it to, and that it doesn't collapse? I will focus on these challenges a bit by looking at these 3 cases where nature-based solutions are implemented on large scale. First, starting in Rwanda, in Kigali city, where urban wetlands are used to reduce storm water flooding. Let's check if I can make this run. But basically, this is what happens in Kigali to the main roads and transport corridors with high-intensity rainfall events. So you can imagine that this causes large disruption in the city, which means disruption of economic activities as well. As a matter of fact, urbanized land in Kigali has tripled in the last 25 years, and these high-intensity rainfall events are expected to increase with climate change. So basically, this is happening because these roads have been built in low-lying areas connecting one hill area to another, in areas where there were former wetlands. So right now, a large-scale plan is being implemented, which looks like this, and all the dark green in the middle is newly planned wetlands to be rehabilitated. And you see those, and doing this will actually reduce urban flooding and stormwater flooding in the city. And this is an example of one of these projects. This is called Kigondo Wetland, and it's a former industrial area, which was built on a former wetland. And what they did now, this is in 2018, but now already they cleared it and they actually transferred it back into a wetland. And here there's some modeling exercises, and we ran several models looking whether actually these wetland areas and retaining water in these areas would help to reduce flood peaks. And basically the main challenge here is in that they now start planning what this wetland should look like. And they really approach it from an engineering perspective. So what can be done here better is actually to integrate these wetlands with biodiversity and social services. So often, as you see to the left, what we call a wetland may actually in reality be a rice field or be polluted. And the challenge is in making it biodiverse and having a social service so that people actually feel responsible to take care of it. Another challenge will be to integrate this in the whole area plan and to also implement nature-based solutions higher on the hill slopes to reduce flooding actually more from upstream as well. So another example is Zambia and the Lukanga swamp, where WWF is working intensely right now. And this swamp is a part of the Kafue River Basin, and 50% of Zambia's population lives in this basin. And the water of the swamp is used for drinking water, for irrigation, and for hydropower. So it constitutes the main power source for Lusaka city, for example. The swamp is actually acting as a sponge. So it stores water in wet periods and it slowly releases it in dry periods, which actually takes care of the base flow in the Kafue River. And it has a high value for biodiversity. However, problems with the swamp right now is that it's infilling, so retention capacity is reducing, and that people are, which is caused by erosion, but also by encroachment from the site and by invasive weeds that are moving in the area. So the challenge here is actually to make quantify the economical benefits of this wetland, and to make a payment scheme from the services that the wetland provides. So what we did is we evaluated the services and we divided them in direct benefits, which are monetizable, and in indirect benefits to the right of this figure. And direct benefits include, of course, water regulation and the base flow in the Kafue River, which benefits these direct users to the left of this picture, which is a drinking water company of Lusaka, the basic energy support ZESCO, the hydropower company, but also some sugar, which actually uses it for irrigation water. And then it benefits a lot of local communities in indirect services that are not so easy to quantify and to make monetizable, which is of course a pitfall for cases like this. So if we look at what happens when in a very dry year, the damage for these companies of losing services in this wetland can amount up to 40 million in a dry year. So that sort of illustrates the importance of wetlands like this. However, our experiences with payment for ecosystem services, for example, are very challenging and difficult. Those schemes are difficult to implement. So we made a sort of scheme of small scale payments or taxes that could actually lead to building the economic case around this, because to maintain the function of this wetland, building the economic case is crucial in this area. And that's a challenge, same as economic reform that's needed, right? So that we better start evaluating indirect benefits all over the world, basically. And the last case is Kenya and the coastal mangroves. All of the 5 countries in Kenya, they host mangroves, but also reefs and seagrass beds and other types of important coastal ecosystems. And a lot of these ecosystems are degrading either by encroachment of population or by clear cutting. Mangroves are very popular for coal, for example, and for timber. Well, you see below Mombasa, so the population of Mombasa is expanding rapidly, which is actually threatening not only downstream wetlands, reef quality, but also upstream wetlands that are also important for buffering flood and riverine flooding in the city. If we look at some of these coastal countries and we move a bit south in Kenya, we did some quick calculations on the amount that mangroves help in providing coastal protection services. And we see, for example, that in Kwale, the southern country in one of the southern countries in Kenya, these mangroves can contribute to 90% of reducing wave heights in the area, which means that they actually are a very important element in keeping coastlines stable. So this whole case is actually less developed, but there's a main challenge here in doing a couple of things. Is also in linking up upstream and downstream solutions. So looking at these sort of coastal ecosystems in the full range of ecosystems, but also realizing that there's linkages between those different systems. So often if the coral reef disappears, it shelters the habitat for the mangrove. So the ecosystem approach there, looking at single ecosystems, actually need to be transferred to look at ranges of ecosystems and how to conserve these. So some generic.
You have crossed the 8 minutes. So
oh, well, I was finalizing, so I'm really on time. Some generic recommendations. Well, there's for me, the first one is a dream. I would actually see somewhere that we sort of start leveraging funding sources to develop an entire catchment MBS, reviving a city, realizing clean drinking water, and safekeeping of nature and biodiversity on a large scale. And we're looking for areas where something like this is possible. You can think of Mombasa, for example, and then reviving the whole catchment. Well, very important message, ecosystems should not be conserved solely for a biodiversity point of view, but they should be integrated in present infrastructure and future coastal development, because often, like you see with the mangroves in Kenya, they play a very important role in actually buffering against forces. So don't dam or dike or close them off from the fluxes of sediment and water and nutrients that they need. And then basically we recommended to raise a South-South community of learners, like we're doing also in the Netherlands, like we're doing in areas in Asia, to exchange, share experience and best practices, because implementing nature-based solutions is not yet easy, not yet common practice, and a lot of work needs to be done, so we better learn from each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for setting the best example in staying under the 10 minutes. Really appreciate it. Fantastic presentations. And for the participants, I'm sure that you have lots of questions. I personally have lots of questions. Please put them in the chat so that we bring them together as part of the panel conversation after the 4 presentations we have today. And fantastic cases. When I was Regional Director for Sustainable Development at the World Bank for Africa, I actually visited the 3 cases that you mentioned. So I can attest that actually these nature-based solutions are integral, and there's no way to solve the problems that you describe with gray infrastructure alone. So it is my great pleasure now to introduce and go from Africa to Pakistan. Okay, and now Dr. Masood Arshad, who is the Senior Manager at WWF Pakistan, and is the first Scientific Committee Coordinator for the country office of WWF. Over his long period of service with WWF, one of the link mark of WWF whenever goes to Pakistan, he really has worked on a wide range of projects of really dynamic program that WWF has there, including the Pakistan Wetlands Program. And today he's going to talk to us about Recharge Pakistan. So Dr. Arshad, please go ahead.
Yeah. Let me find the presentation here. I don't know where it's gone now.
No problem at all. I know how that happens.
Yeah.
So great that you can come in. And as I was saying, look, what you're gonna see from the 4 presentations is that there are so many similarities across this issue, no matter what is the ecological situation of each. So I hope that we can compare and contrast. Now, Dr. Arshad, I can see the screen. I can see the slides. Please go ahead.
Okay.
And I can hear you very well.
Thank you, distinguished delegates and organizers and participants. I think showcasing Recharge Pakistan to the national and global community is more of a passion now. And the scale and scope this project is being developed and later implemented, I'm sure that we will not only as a global WWF network, but also the community of development practitioners have a lot to learn from this. So just wanted to start with my favorite slide. This talks about the green guide, where I've also played my role in by contributing in it. It includes case studies from across the globe, where we had played our proactive role in reducing the flood risk. The best thing that I like in it, as it clearly differentiates the structure and non-structural approaches and also discusses the soft engineering solutions, which I feel is a transition between hard infrastructure and nature-based solutions. I take it as a base document always, and I think I take a lot of guidance wherever I am stuck with my work. So borrowed some of the key points from the GCA, Global Center for Adaptation, and it's very relevant to what we are talking today. They talk about the scale and scope of nature-based solutions, which is at the landscape level for sure, which in our case could be the watershed level, riverine belt, or maybe the coastal zone. It shares an insight into the architecture of both the hard and soft solutions and inform us that how the nature-based solutions are so cost-effective than the engineered approaches, and what other direct benefits they offer in terms of adaptation and mitigation potential, as well as direct co-benefits in the form of water quality, water security, health of the people, and the green jobs, and also the biodiversity conservation. So I always, one thing that I always like about nature-based solutions is that they work best when they are designed, implemented, and monitored in partnership with the local stakeholders, including the indigenous communities who have a rich knowledge about the region, the practices they're implementing, and have been living there in close harmony with nature and natural ecosystems. There's a few examples of what are the specific nature-based solution interventions that can be applied in the context of freshwater landscape. You see, there's some common points: protection, restoration, reconnection, enhancement, revival, and improvement are the few key points which have been highlighted in this. And these are the very well applicable to our floodplains, wetlands, hail torrents, headwaters, and riparian vegetation, etc. And this is what the purpose of NBS is in our case. So when we talk about nature-based solutions from a WWF perspective, I guess we are very close to what we already had said, is reducing the impacts of extreme floods. So what we do is the restoring and reconnecting wetlands with the river. This is the main purpose of doing that. Keeping deltas above the rising seas. So by making sure that the sediments reach to the delta and the mangroves are there to stand firm against the wave action, and which are considered as the first line of defense in most of the countries. Enhancing water security and soaking up storm images, because it also talks about vegetation improvement and enhancing the health of rivers that sustain us. So this story about Reach Our Pakistan starts. Before going into detail, I'll just take a minute or so to set the basis for our further discussion on Reach Our Pakistan. But I think it is good for all of us to understand that. To start with, when we talk about Indus River, it is considered as Pakistan's lifeline. And at the same time, we're also experiencing catastrophic floods and droughts exacerbated by climate change. So our history shows that we have always relied on costly, hard infrastructure, flood and water management measures with limited or no efficacy. And we have always considered these infrastructures the only viable option, a solution to the problem till now. Keeping in view the several such flooding events in the country, like this, the one we have got in 2010, and while learning lessons from across the globe in general, and specifically from Yangtze River where we went to that region, I think this has started the decision and policy makers of Pakistan. They have started taking initiatives about other cost-effective nature-based solutions, interventions as well. So I'll talk about Reach Our Pakistan here. Reach Our Pakistan is the first of its kind initiative in the country that purely focuses on nature-based solutions, which is also a widely recognized subject now at the global level due to a whole range of direct and indirect benefits. As we have also seen nowadays, development partners, public sector, and a whole range of donors who are involved in mitigating the impacts of climate change and addressing climate vulnerabilities are now focusing on nature-based solutions as one viable solution to move on. So Reach Our Pakistan is one such good initiative that has become one of the topmost priorities of the present government as well. So right now, WWF Pakistan, in collaboration with the implementing partners, is fully engaged in designing the project at its scale and scope along the Indus River, where I already talked that we have got a lot of things to learn from this program. The first phase is 10 years duration with an estimated investment of $150 to $200 million. And we're expecting approximately $15 million from GCF. Rest will be the co-financing, and I'm happy to share with you the story that the Ministry of Water Resources has already provided $40 million co-financing in-kind co-financing to this project, which for this cause. So the project outline, won't go into that detail, but just talk about the three components that we are talking about. The first talks about that they are gelled in with each other so well, because if you see that the scenes, the scenes merging into another, another, if it adopts a bottom-up, and also it adopts a bottom-up approach. The first component talks about ecosystem-based adaptation, the real crux that we are working on, the specific NBS intervention that we will undertake in the 6 shortlisted sites across the Indus River. The second talks about the people who are facing the challenges of the region, and flooding, maybe drought, and also loss of livelihoods, etc., and building their climate resilience while learning lessons from the field. And the third component that talks about enabling the environment for NBS within the country, so that it is mainstreamed in the government's planning agenda at all levels. So after that, this is one lesson learned that I wanted to share with you, because engage the right stakeholders throughout the process. You'll make sure that ownership is all there at all stages, from communities to subnational governments and national government till the Prime Minister of Pakistan. All are just aligned for the project, and this is one big success story for this program to start with. So I'm just wanted to see, give you an update on how we are located and where the sites are in Pakistan. So there are almost 10 to 11 potential sites that we initially proposed and are further categorized in the form of floodplains, wetlands, and hill torrents. So we applied a specific set of criteria to further shortlist the best 6 sites for further investigation. So physical, socioeconomic, and the environmental criteria were used. And you can see that the climate rationale was on the top, and we were just deciding on this section of these 6 sites. Just wanted to give you what we have been proposing under these NBS interventions in this project. So the whole range of nature-based solutions have been proposed for different sites and for different thematic areas: floodplains, wetlands, and hill torrents. So once again, I'll reiterate here that you'll see that the restoration, management, conservation, reconnection, improvement, enhancement. So all these, and the revival, all these are the key lessons to learn for all of us, because when we will be implementing NBS in this part of Pakistan. So as you rightly pointed out in the beginning, because this is also talking about the hybrid structures as well. And just wanted to tell you that here the NBS also works very well with the hard infrastructures, which can enhance its life, improve the catchment area to avoid the structures further degradation, and you can have many more benefits of using NBS in a combination with the hard infrastructure. But these hybrid solutions are still important to explore further, especially when working with the government's mandate of constructing the whole range of structures and the financial institutions' investment, especially in the infrastructures. So we really need to play our role in that system through lobbying and advocacy for inclusion of NBS in their projects and programs for their longevity. So it's not only that we are doing this for the sake of that activity, but it's also for the long-term survival and sustainability of those interventions. So just wanted to share.
You just crossed the 8 minutes, so just to make sure that we keep it the pace and to hear all of the great slides that you have ahead. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
This is just the last slide. So we have to finalize in the next funding proposal development a few crucial studies, which is the GCF requirement and some of the co-financing commitments for that. We're engaging in this process, we are engaging private sector, financial institutions, and other multilateral donors who are interested in joining hands with this flagship initiative of Pakistan. I'll again say that there's a lot of learning for us, for the country, WWF network, and the global community as a whole, because the scale and scope we are talking, nothing has been done so far elsewhere, as has been rightly pointed out now by you, and it is a great opportunities of investment for everybody. So this is all from my side, and I hope that I'm on time. Any
You are
specific
perfectly on
question right
time,
now?
and it was
Yeah.
really appreciate that you kept it into
Yeah.
10 minutes, and especially because the richness of, as you were saying, the community of management of hydrological risk in WWF has produced some of the most interesting work that we have seen around the world.
So
And,
any specific question, yeah, you can ask me, you can email me at my email address. I would love to respond to your queries.
Absolutely. And look, for everybody who has questions for Dr. Arshad in a moment during the panel, please put them in the chat, and then we're going to be having a conversation right after the 4 presentations have gone through. So we look forward to that. I can see the chat firing up because there are so many interesting questions for you, Dr. Arshad. So stay tuned.
I will have a look.
Wonderful. Let's go then to the third presentation.
Thank you so much for listening about this wonderful initiative. Thank you.
You are very kind for presenting this important case for Pakistan. Let's go then to the Mekong Delta, and then Karel Heltnier from Royal Haskoning is going to do the presentation. He's a water management specialist that is really looking at these issues of integrated water resources management, flood risk management, and forecasting and early warning, with really a broad set of experiences, not only in developed countries in the US, UK, Canada, and the Netherlands, but also all the way in Asia and in Africa, from Indonesia and China, all the way to Yemen, Morocco, and Sudan. So covering really high middle-income countries and low-income countries and fragile environments. So, Karel, please go ahead. We want to hear what's happening on the Mekong Delta.
Thank you very much, Ada, for this kind introduction. And well, let's see if I can trigger some questions too of the audience. Well, I have the honor to speak on about a project that we have been implementing, and a Vietnamese international team for WWF in Vietnam, in the Mekong Delta, to be specific. And this is a project that is actually assessing where nature-based approaches, I would say, could be applied to sort of increase the sustainability of the Delta, but also serve the typical ambitions of WWF. So in line with what the Vietnamese government ambitions are. It's focused on visualization, preparing a storyline of how you could introduce nature-based solutions, or further introduce and then scale them up over larger areas. So the project is for WWF, but it has been implemented by EcoShape, which is a Netherlands based but internationally operating foundation that supports the introduction of nature-based solutions in the widest sense. One Architecture is an international architecture and landscape architecture firm, and Royal Haskoning DHV is an international consultant, and I work for them. So let's have a quick look at the Mekong Delta to provide you some background. It's a land of water, like Bangladesh. You've seen before. The Mekong is a big river, floods into the sea in the Mekong Delta. 80 million people are living there. It's an important area for the Vietnamese economy. Most of the rice and almost all of the aquaculture, or a large percentage, is produced in this area. So a flourishing agricultural economy, but also very rural. It's a land of water, like I said. A big river is flowing into it, and over the past 150 years, the area has been, you can call it perforated with numerous canals, which brought prosperity. Navigation wasn't facilitated, irrigation, but also, of course, brought some downsides. Because of this perforation, it's difficult to keep fresh water over the dry season in the area, because it's flowing out easily, and salinity is intruding through these canals also. So you have to take some measures to sort of manage this densely populated environment. What for me is remarkable, it's you can say the lowest large delta in the world. So the average area where these 80 million people are living is less than 1 meter above sea level. So if you imagine the future, end of the century, and sea level rise, you can see that there are some challenges in this area. And that's not just climate change on the larger scale, but also, of course, well, the man-induced changes. Dam building upstream is taking place well, rapidly, and that has to a large extent decreased the suspended sediment in the river, and that's ongoing, which means that on the coast, one of the reasons you see that there is a significant coastal erosion. We'll come back to that in a minute. Other challenges in the area are very typical, I think, for deltas. In that sense, we sort of speaking, I think, all in the same way. So beside the sediment decline, you have this salinity intrusion. Of course, it's low-lying, used to be, well, flooded very regularly. With dikes, this is sort of partially controlled, but flooding is an issue, but also provides a lot of benefit, fertilization and fresh water. And also on the rivers, you see quite some coastal erosion. So it's an area with a lot of opportunities and also full of challenges. So how to tackle these challenges, and given the trends in terms of climate change, sea level rise in the future, I mean, there nature-based solutions can play an important role. We can do some with concrete, but nature-based solutions play a key role in the future sustainability. And what we actually have been done with this team is, well, look at two cases which are sort of archetypical cases in the Mekong Delta, and maybe you can generalize them to other areas. In how could you approach with nature-based solutions a set of the challenges that I discussed, but also create more prosperity, agricultural production, and increase the natural values. And we look at the riverside on the Mekong River, and we look at the coastal side with coastal erosion, mangroves, a loss of land in the south. So these two cases have been selected because if you're able to sort of tackle the problems there, you can scale the approach up to the whole delta, and I think also to many other areas. First, we'll look at the riverine case. So here we have a small national park called Cham Chin National Park in Dong Thap province bordering Cambodia. This area is in the riverine area, and what you see here is that over time in the area around the national park, farmers have gradually built dikes. Behind me, if you see my picture, you see the border between Cambodia and Vietnam. Cambodia is the area in the flood season without dikes. Vietnam is the green part where dikes have been built, and they brought reduced, of course, the flood impacts, but they also reduced the fertility in the soil, and the natural values of the area decreased. So there's this trade-off going on. In the middle of that area, you have this national park, which is sort of like an island of nature in a completely managed agricultural area. And there's a big debate going on the soil fertility and the crop yields, because there isn't that what they call the third rice crop. Well, there isn't the regular flooding anymore, and the flooding is replaced by rice cropping. You see a gradual fertility loss in the area. Also, the natural values have decreased, while the ambition of the Vietnamese government is to revert that from 4% forest currently in the delta, bring it gradually up in the coming 40 years to 15%. So there's really an ambition to sort of return some of the nature back. And what is quite important also is that because of the dam building, the kind of lower middle floods in the river have decreased because they can be partially captured by the reservoirs. The extreme floods will still happen. and there is no rational system of flood risk management in the delta, which would be a combination of dike building, controlled flooding, and spatial planning. So you would need to, in order to combat these extreme floods, you would need areas that you can inundate. Well, an area like this national park and the surrounding area would be excellent for to be designated as an area where you can introduce controlled floodings, so revert some of the previous situation. And in this case, it is an excellent case for WWF and the Vietnamese government to cooperate in terms of institutionalization and legislation, and also knowledge to provide an example of controlled flooding in the upper part of the river system. By
Carol, you crossed the 8-minute mark. So just to let you know.
Okay, I'll move on to the next example, because this area is to create a buffer zone and introduce the system of controlled flooding, but at the same time work on the profitability of the agricultural practices around the national park and really create a transition zone. The second case is about the coast, and there we focus on an area which is, for Vietnamese circumstances, relatively undeveloped. But if you zoom in, you can see a mangrove coast with quite a lot of interventions. It's still limited compared to other parts of the coast, where you see very intensive aquaculture, but already you see developments. And this mangrove zone plays an important role for the flood protection, and also for the erosion of the coast. This coastline in the southern part of the Mekong Delta has eroded 1.5 kilometers over the past 30 years, and how to revert that. And therefore you can't just plant mangroves or create abiotic conditions where the mangroves will grow. You have to take a set of measures that together will make it possible to sort of maintain the coastal zone in a sustainable manner, which means that there is a creation of abiotic conditions that facilitate the mangrove growth. You may have to protect them on the coastal side with natural breakwaters, but also people need to be able to earn a living in those mangrove zones to maintain them and not further encroach. And then where normally you would build in Vietnam, you would build the flood protection on the coast, you need to think about moving that back, so that having the foreshore with mangroves and the dike that protects people, more densely populated areas inland, further back to make it future-proof. You can't just solve one problem at a time. You have to look at such area comprehensively and in an integrated manner. And also here, I think the Vietnamese government, in cooperation with WWF, could play a role. And if you can solve it here in an area which is relatively unaffected, you can think about the other areas where you have serious coastal issues but are much more developed. So in that case, you have two examples, one in the riverine area, one in the coastal area, where you could gradually, by using nature-based solutions, improve the sustainable management of an area and also make it profitable for the inhabitants, and then think about scaling up those to other parts of the Delta. Sorry for
no, you actually were exactly very close on time, Carol. Thank you very much.
Okay, this is my story.
That last message, which is don't solve only the problems of today, solve the problems of tomorrow, because this is such a dynamic situation with climate change that if you're trying to solve what happens today, then you're gonna get into trouble very soon. So really important message out there. And now the big question, how do you actually find money for all of this? So it's not only the technical design, it's not only participation, it's not only bringing the private sector, but it's also how do you put it all together so that the finance flows. So Anirudh Ragashekar, who is with Pegasus, is going to be talking about this topic, and he works at the intersection of data analysis, public policy, and urban research at Pegasus. So great, I just saw your presentation. I think that is going to be a great opportunity to learn about the topic. So please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Cape Town. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. All good?
I hear you loud and clear. We can see the presentation. So we are all good to go.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to first thank the WWF team for inviting us to share some of our work with this audience. My name is Anirudh, and I'm a principal at Pegasus, a South African-based public consultancy, public sector consultancy, and we work on a range of sectors, from infrastructure financing, transaction advisory, solid waste, water management, transport. I myself am a city planner and economist and work largely on projects in the company's city practice, which focuses on urban governance, data analytics, and sustainability. Today, I'm happy to present some of our work on nature-based solutions in Rwanda, Kenya, and Zambia, which we produced for WWF. The objective of our project was to undertake a high-level feasibility study involving a cost-benefit analysis and produce a sort of innovative financing proposal on how to implement these projects. Our goal was to make the case that these projects are economically and financially viable. And if we can fully understand and catalog all the overarching costs and benefits and find funders and funding models that suit the relevant context and the project. We are very much building off the work of other folks, including Deltares. And indeed, we're working on exactly the same context and exactly the same projects. And I'm glad we aligned almost entirely. So this is great. I'll start by maybe highlighting our overarching conceptual model or our mental model. We start with a primary problem, which in each of our scenarios is flooding and drought. So lots of water or very little water. And to mitigate this issue, there's many things a policymaker can do. Option one is, of course, do nothing, which has its risks as well as its benefits. Doing nothing can make sure that existing jobs are not affected in the short run and that there are no financial costs borne in the short run. But of course, in the long run, as we were all well aware, there's serious impacts. Option two is to build sort of traditional grain infrastructure, dams, dikes, concrete drains, etc. And these are the benefits of often solving the problem at hand, but can be expensive to construct and might be expensive to maintain. Grain infrastructure also has the potential to create other problems in the long term or unintended consequences, essentially. And option three is to construct sort of nature-based solutions, one that might be cheaper in terms of the upfront costs and operating costs, and given the ability for nature to be more resilient to future changes, might be cheaper long run as well. We want to emphasize that we are well aware that purely nature-based solutions don't exist. The truth is that green infrastructure exists on a spectrum. However, we've used this framework to better highlight the suite of options available for policymakers, as well as the opportunities. So a quick description of our context. And again, I think our colleague from Deltares has already explained a little bit of this, but we want to emphasize a few things. So first, in Kigali, we're focusing on wetlands, and we're focusing on restoring, maintaining, preserving wetlands in urban areas to solve the problem of urban flooding. And flooding affects a range of stakeholders, including urban households, businesses. And one of the ways this can be mitigated is by preserving wetlands. Kigali is one place where wetland preservation is already underway, and this is undertaken in some areas, but not all. And the question is really about taking the NBS concept and scaling it across the entire city. In Lamu, we focus on mangroves and coastal areas, or in Kenya rather, we focus on Lamu and mangroves in Lamu. Again, the problem here is flooding, which mangroves can help to prevent, but this is coastal flooding. And coastal flooding on the Kenyan coast is likely to affect businesses, industry in these areas, in the coastal areas, as well as ports, urban households, and also other livelihood opportunities such as tourism, fishing, etc. And finally, in Zambia, we look at the Congo swamps, which are located in the upper middle of the Kafue Basin. And these are permanent swamps that are located approximately 50 kilometers west of the city of Kabwe, the central province of Zambia, and within the catchment of the Kafue River. The swamps significantly influence the flows of the Iteshi Reservoir, located downstream of the Kafue River. And the entities that are affected by the swamps include businesses, industries, utilities, households that are downstream of the swamps. what we're evaluating when it comes down to it are the benefits of preserving what already exists naturally, coupled with deliberate efforts to enhance certain naturally occurring vegetation. In Kigali, we're talking about keeping wetlands the way they are and diverting harmful economic activity away from them, while also constructing some concrete drains or just drains. In Kenya, we're talking about mangroves and potentially additional infrastructure. In Zambia, we're talking about swamp preservation and restoration. Just a quick map here to showcase what our areas of interest. Oh, I'm sorry, this is meant to be up here. Apologies. We've spent a great deal of time evaluating the economic benefits and costs of each of these activities, but rather than go into the details of these, I think I'll share a few ideas of how these could be financed. We emphasize could here as there are infinite ways to finance things, and we're merely suggesting a few options. But to begin with, I'll start with our sort of mental model. Financing any project comes down to understanding how much money can be raised based on anticipated future flows of income. And these anticipated future flows can be used to seek upfront financing. Like a mortgage on a house, any upfront financing needs to be paid for with future money earned, which requires some understanding of the revenue models. And in the case of a house, those revenue models are the job that you or your partner have. In the case of NBSs, it comes down in some ways to the form of the benefits that these solutions bring and how they can be monetized. And we broadly classify these revenue streams as tariffs and taxes. In the case of projects that we're evaluating, there's an argument to be made that the economic benefits are great enough that governments and philanthropists might be compelled to pay for these projects without requiring exact payment. But in each of these cases, a clear economic case has to be made. But these sort of transfers from governments and philanthropists, these are sort of, we bracket as transfers or classify as transfers. And most of our work sort of hinges on the concept of balancing taxes, tariffs, and transfers in a way that makes some projects more feasible than others. It also centers on the importance of an anchoring institution when implementing an NBS solution. And these anchoring institutions need to be capable, capacitated, and be able to channel funds and human capacity properly. So let's begin with Rwanda. I'm going to zoom through these because I know we're short on time, but I hope we can get through most of this. In Rwanda, I'd say it's possibly our most straightforward example. Here we imagine that NBS interventions may be financed by public entities through the fiscus, grants or concessional loans. To ensure that funds are managed properly, a fund, like what exists in the country already, FUNERWA, may be used to channel money and manage projects. And this type of entity would also have the added responsibility of bundling or finding the most appropriate schemes using various sources of finance that they receive. But funds like FUNERWA already focus on promoting green activity and often well equipped to do this. In the future, potential revenue sources that may be used to pay back public monies or concessional loans may come in the form of ecotourism revenues, increased property taxes. As we all know, property taxes increase for buildings close to a green space, or potentially urban agriculture, although the urban agriculture, the possibilities or the revenues generated from urban agriculture tend to be quite low in a country like Rwanda. However, Rwanda may also be able to make the case that NBS interventions sequester carbon from the atmosphere and thereby might allow them to sell carbon credits. Moving on to Lamu, we propose a slightly different variation. In this case, we imagine an anchoring institution such as the Lamu Port Authority or LAPSED, which is a parastatal entity, raising funds to finance an NBS with debt financing, such as a bond issue. This can be tricky in some contexts, but should a parastatal not be able to raise funds, it's conceivable that an institution may be able to raise funds operating on behalf of that parastatal. One scenario we can imagine is a parastatal issuing bonds to be purchased by ESG investors or institutional investors, with the bond dividends being paid through tariffs levied on companies that operate within the confines of a port authority or an economic corridor. Outside funding via grants, however, are often critical in this type of scenario to ensure creditworthiness of the parastatal, and this can be achieved through guarantees that would ensure that bondholders feel confident that whatever they purchase will be paid back, their dues will be paid back. And finally, moving to Zambia, here we focus on the importance of Lukanda swamps for ensuring consistent flow of water to downstream users. And one of our downstream users would be one of the the folks that has already been identified, which is the hydropower company. So essentially, the swamps ensure that the swamps, if correctly managed, ensure that that water, that runs to the Teshi Reservoir, there's a consistent flow of water. And so the hydropower utility might become an important institution and might serve as the anchoring institution that seeks money in the form of grants or concessional loans to manage the conservation of the swamps which are upstream of them. In this scenario, ZESCO, which we assume will have the technical and managerial expertise to manage a project like this, will be able to receive funds or channel them to NGOs or local government institutions to conserve the swamps and restore the areas that are activists. I'm glad our suggestion again resonates quite nicely with the suggestions of Deltares and colleagues at WWF. And while ZESCO isn't a private sector institution, it is a utility and operates in a manner that is more market oriented than your traditional government entity. And yeah, I've zoomed through these very quickly, no pun intended. So hope you'll be able to capture some of the key elements.
Wonderful.
However, yeah, these are just possibilities. Takes a lot more.
You the fantastic possibilities, and it's so exciting to see that there are very different models depending on the institutions that are involved. So I'm sure that we're going to get lots of questions from the audience. I personally have many questions, so be prepared for the panel conversation altogether. Now, we have a commentator that is going to join us in the panel, but before we move to the panel, I love to invite Imelda Dada Bakudo, who's a climate change expert with the Asian Climate Change Network. That has been working for decades on the issues of biodiversity conservation and conservative finance in the Philippines, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, with all kinds of stakeholders. And she provides technical advice to the Association of Southeast Asia Network and its 10 members to really how to get to strengthen regional and international practices on these issues of climate finance. So Imelda, I understand that you are with us. So if I can ask you a little bit of a reaction, you heard all the way from the very technical engineering planning processes to the complexity of communities, farmers, encroachment, to the realities of large plans to deal with gray and green infrastructure for large basins, to the question of how to raise the money. So given your long experience, what are your main reactions, any thoughts that you have on the 4 presentations, and then we get into the panel conversation.
Thank you for the question, Ede, and can you hear me?
I can hear you very well and see you well,
perfectly.
So please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so the presentations were great. It really shows the different aspects of what we are dealing with in ASEAN. You know, as Ede has introduced me, I'm with the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, which is a knowledge exchange platform promoting climate smart agriculture at the beginning for ASEAN and for the absorption of this knowledge into policies of the 10 policymakers from the Ministries of Agriculture, Food and Forestry of the 10 countries of ASEAN. So as you can imagine, it took us maybe 5 years to introduce the concept climate smart agriculture to the policymakers of the 10 countries. And now we are letting them be engaged with nature-based solution, another concept, and then with food system approach as well. So we are bringing them towards nature-based food system approaches. And you know, our policymakers are really scratching their heads, but they are trying to grapple with that this is really the right direction indeed. So it's taking a while, but thanks to UN agencies, international NGOs, the science community, we are really holding the hands of our policymakers towards nature-based solutions in policymaking. Now there's discussion in the presentations on large scale. And when you talk about large scale, maybe ASEAN at this scale of 10 countries is large scale enough. And the challenges are myriad for introducing and absorption and getting support for nature-based solutions. A lot of the presentations really reflect as well the reality that we are seeing. Nature-based solution is very much a cross-cutting issue across all sectors. And what we are seeing, if you're dealing with policymakers the same way I am with ASEAN, everything is in silos, in bureaucratic corners, And there is reaching out and cross-coordination in order to implement nature-based solution. This is one of the major challenges that we are facing across sectors, across silos, and across bureaucracies. But we are trying to get there. We have examples. We believe that one of the things that we need to really get things across is to really get the financing, as from our last sharing, aligning investments with climate change policy and frameworks, both at the national level and at the regional level. We have an example coming from my region. We've got 6 countries, the same way that Carol has showed his presentation on the Mekong River. We've got 6 countries of Southeast Asia applying now for the GCF in order to get this aligning of investment plans with climate change policies and frameworks. And I'm talking specifically of agriculture investment plans that will really incorporate nature-based solutions. So this is one direction that we are heading, and this is one example. Another thing that maybe what we are aiming for is support at the multilateral environmental agreement level, such as the UNFCCC. We're all aware that COP26 is happening soon, and there is an entity called the ASEAN Negotiating Group for Agriculture in terms of nature-based or agriculture issues, nature-based food production issues. And we are contributing and heavily shaping the Coronivia Joint Work for Agriculture, but we are also reaching the point where we say we've had enough of statements and views shared. We really want action. We really want to have a decision of COP26, although I'm getting some rumors that there might not be decisions in terms of agriculture for this COP. But we're really hoping that climate finance will be mandated towards agriculture. And here we're talking about GCF and the GEF fund to prioritize nature-based solutions in agriculture sector. So these are some of the examples. GEF 8 is coming up. And most everyone within this sphere is very busy formulating, and I think nature-based solutions is really forming a key concept and key integrated concept within a lot of the proposals that hope to target GEF 8. So these are examples coming from the region, and we're, you introduce a new concept, it takes years, but we're gonna get there.
Absolutely, Melda. Thank you so much, and thank you for the great work that you're doing all together. Now, I want to invite now back all the panelists because we have such a really rich and diverse set of questions. So what I like to do in this situation is that I'll throw 3 or 4 questions, and then I'll call on each of you. You don't have to answer all 3 or 4. You just pick the one or two that you like, that you have something to offer, and then we'll go through 10, 12 questions in a rapid sequence. I see that many of you have already answered some of the questions in the chat. So thank you so much for doing that and for keeping that multitasking going. So let me start with 3 questions. And I think that they are very practical. And the first one was the wetlands in Kigali or the delta in the Mekong Delta. Is the challenge of land rights, land use, encroachment, and the like. Any insights, any perspectives? How do you think that in environments where sometimes those land rights are not so clear, is nature-based solutions feasible? Can they be part of the problem to strengthen those land rights? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that direction? Question number 1. Question number 2 is an interesting one. Many of you have been talking about nature-based solution, but the whole issue of biodiversity and ecosystem has not come too strongly in the presentations. There seems to be an assumption that just because green is good, but in reality, there are many, not everything green is the same green. There are different ways of reintegrating biodiversity. You need to really bring the biodiversity specialists to this conversation, and therefore it's not just the planners and engineers, but it's a very different dynamics. And we'd love to hear experiences and insights from your cases on how really to bring true core biodiversity and ecosystem connections and all those dimensions into nature-based solutions so that those biodiversity benefits can be leveraged even further. A third question on institutions, and is always a question. Many of the nature-based solutions begin really at the community level, how to engage with the communities, and then with local NGOs, and then they move up to the government. But many of these challenges that you have described sometimes need Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Planning top-down interventions into this process. What are your sense? Is it better to start bottom-up, building the case, getting many of the local issues solved, and then go to finance and planning with solutions? Or do you need to really bring from finance and planning and coming down to do consultations and engagement at the topic? Or what do you think are some of those issues? And then finally on finance, Anirudh, if you were to identify where are the real stumbling blocks, is it lack of money, or is it the institutional challenges? Is it lack of knowledge that nobody knows? Everybody knows how to pay for concrete, but they don't know how to pay for mangroves or wetlands, and that becomes a really complicated part of the solutions. So I'm going to go in the same order of the presentation. I'll go first to Briege, then Carol, then Anirudh, and then Imelda for your reflections on those 4 questions. Again, you don't have to answer the 4. You can pick one. If you want to pick 2, that's also great. Whatever you want. I put questions diverse enough that everybody should have something to say. Briege, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. You put the questions so interesting. Now I want to answer them all, but I won't do that. I think I'll start with the biodiversity because we had a discussion on it in the chat, and it's a very good point. And I think a lot of projects, also conservation and restoration projects and nature-based solutions projects in specific, have not been measuring biodiversity. And it would include doing a baseline study before you start doing an intervention also, and then looking at what you replace and what comes back, and if that is actually comparable to the ecosystem that you are restoring in place. And then the difficulty is to do that on different scales as well. So you have local biodiversity, but what does it mean for biodiversity in the region? So that's complex, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's not been done. But I think if we don't start discussing about it and not doing it, the nature-based solutions may end up as some kind of greenwashing thing in the world and actually do environmental damage. And you see that happening, that people value one ecosystem above. You see other projects where they do large-scale reforestation, for example, and they do it with non-native species, only monocultures, and they present this as a natural solution. But basically, it can be very damaging for the ecosystem that is in place. So important, and I agree with you, the only way to tackle this is to, if you do nature-based solutions, to bridge across disciplines and to include ecologists, and to actually do a baseline. And I think we spend too little effort, time, fund, and resources in the pre-feasibility phase in getting data. We often start intervening in areas where we have no data, and in getting solid data, and in getting and in doing measurements, and actually making a good plan with targets of what we want to achieve.
Fantastic. Very good. Carol, if I can come to you, and then I'll go to Anirudh. Carol?
Well, I think Briege makes a good point that you need to approach it from different angles. And in my story, you saw I'm not an ecologist. I'm a civil engineer. So I look at the system, and it's not just about nature, but I look at how can you restore certain aspects of the system that sort of help you to manage the terrain, the area in a more sustainable way. But it's more than that. I mentioned it, but it's also mentioned by by other speakers, is that if you, for example, change the land use around this national park I was talking about and introduce more regular flooding, people should still earn a living there. I mean, and that's, yeah, is it the financial aspect or not? People moved in to sort of earn a living. And if you want to change the area around that park or in the mangrove area, you sort of need to find a way for them to still earn a living. And of course, you cannot do, especially not on the coast, with some enforcement. I mean, there should be kind of land use planning, and you sort of enforce it. But also, you have to be realistic that people need to well, make a living, and then they will comply to the change. And that's not so easy, but it's essential. Otherwise, it's can be environmentally sustainable, but not economically.
Absolutely. And I think that's linked to the question that I was asking on land and property rights, because in the end, this is a lot of a failure of the commons and figuring out how to either maintain the community-based land ownership structures that exist there, or to be able to strengthen the rights and the titles, so that communities do take care of that, precisely because of what you said. In the end, it needs to make social and economic sense for that. Anirudh, on finance, what are the stumbling blocks? What do you think? Is it money? Is it institutions and regulations? Is it knowledge? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think, probably 3 core stumbling blocks, I'd say, and obviously there's millions others that we could describe. But the first one would sort of be the awareness, the full life cycle benefits of gray versus green. Coming back to the previous point, like fully understanding not all green is green, understanding exactly what these interventions are, how they might translate into what ecological benefits as well as benefits for people living in these areas is critical. And sort of having a very robust sense of the full benefits from both the green infrastructure as well as the gray infrastructure is critical to sort of understanding whether things are actually bankable and finance can be financed. The sort of other stumbling blocks would come down to maybe the novelty of the sector as an investment class, the limited understanding for financial institutions and a willingness to take this risk. But this kind of plays on the previous point, which is more information, more data might be able to solve that knowledge gap. And sort of a final point, especially in sort of emerging market contexts, are the sort of normal challenges of financing any project, which is a lack of a creditworthy sponsor. So, energy companies in the case of ZESCO might certainly benefit from nature-based solutions, but they lack the sort of financial standing to borrow, as well as possibly the capacity to implement any sort of intervention. So I'd say it's sort of these 3 core topics amongst many others.
Fantastic. No, that's super practical altogether. Imelda, I don't know, you can pick, but I'd love to hear about the institutional arrangements. What is your sense? Is it top down, bottom up? What's your sense?
Yeah, I think, Ede, you asked the question, what is the most common challenge faced by, scaling up nature-based solutions? And you asked whether it's lack of expertise or lack of money. And in my experience in dealing with these bureaucracies and with these several ministries and intergovernmental organizations, it's not really those. I think that there's plenty of money lying around. I think there's even plenty of expertise. We have a full reach of science, but really what in my experience, and I might be wrong, it's really the lack of coordination and lack of integration and lack of desire for collaboration that is the major stumbling block towards moving this towards larger scale. I think we have enough scientists to convince the policymakers, but the policymakers are lodged within their silos and their bureaucracy. ASEAN recently supported, for example, an ASEAN multi-sectoral framework on climate change. And for 9 years, not much has moved because it's too much all over different silos. What we need are really champions to push this forward, champions from sectors and success stories. And in terms of the question on how is it, what's the difficulty in connecting biodiversity and ecosystem services? I really think that in terms of coming from the agriculture, very productive economic sector, integrating this, it takes a long while for the understanding of the benefits of environmental services, at least for the policymakers within the agriculture sector. And I think the solution to this somehow is really showing a very clear case for benefit sharing and increased income from nature-based solutions. So that's just
Wonderful.
my reflection.
That's very good. I see a question saying, are these presentations going to be available? So this is a perfect time for me to do a pitch and an advertisement for the Water Adaptation Community and the many subgroups that are cropping up. And I think this group on nature-based solutions for climate adaptation is going to be a vibrant one. Please join that conversation, so that this is not just a series of events. It's really a continuous conversation and an exchange of ideas and a building of a community that really can support each other across different countries and regions of the world. I'm going to finish with two questions, and you can answer either one of them, or you can have one final thought. And we want to keep it just to less than a minute to each. One is on uncertainties. Many of you describe climate uncertainties, or what is it that is going to happen, or many of the factors on the intensity and frequency and floods, or the important trends on urbanization and encroachment or agricultural change. How do you actually plan for nature-based solutions, knowing that there are so many uncertainties out there? Question number one. And question number two is really, is there a universally accepted approach or set of guidelines on nature-based solutions that covers all of the aspects that you have discussed, from the really difficult sediment modeling and what to do that, to community engagement, to land rights, to issues of financing, to biodiversity, to institutions? If somebody wants to learn about this, what would you recommend to this process? So you can answer either one of those two questions, or you can have one final thought, one final advice to the community as the conversation continues after this webinar. And let's start again in the same order, Brehi and then Carol. Brehi?
Yeah, uncertainty for sure. I think nature-based solutions are no regret solutions. So they apply typically under uncertain conditions, and they are adaptive. I think for in the future, when we're dealing with climate change, when we're dealing with pressures that we cannot predict so well, I think investing in our natural resources and will help to keep coastlines and river basins resilient.
Wonderful. In the face of uncertainty, no better barrier than nature to help us survive. Carol, let's hear from you.
Let's try the other one. I don't think there's a universal approach, but what is universal when you approach nature-based solutions is that you have to unlike with civil engineering measures, which are very local generally, and maybe nobody knows about them, with nature-based solution, you need space. Space is occupied by other users, and so you need by nature, you need to do it from an integrated way. You really need to go out of the office and into the area to sort of make it work. For the rest, I don't think there's a universal way. Maybe somebody else knows it, but if so, I would like to hear it.
Absolutely. Okay, Anirudh, and then Imelda.
Cool. I think, I mean, final words, I guess kind of combines question 1 and 3 in terms of planning, given a number of uncertainties, and sort of final advice. I guess our thinking would mostly be to look at no regret options, resilient to a range of urban development scenarios and climate scenarios. And I think, those are often the best ways forward. Just figure out exactly what all the sort of sensitivities around what might happen in the future, and sort of go with the no regret scenario.
Fabulous. And Imelda, you have the last word before we go to the conclusion.
I think this is a call for stakeholders, development partners, the science community. And this is in regards to speaking with policymakers, is that let's speak about our solutions in very simple terms that could be understood by policymakers. And let's use existing practices that shows success rates that points toward nature-based solutions that need scaling up. In other words, that these practices are already being practiced by farmers or by groups already, and that, you know, communication is key to policymakers in order to get policy framework support. That's it. from my side.
Wonderful, Imelda. Thank you very much. And now to conclude this webinar, we have a video from, we started with a video from the Global Center on Adaptation. Now we have a video from WWF, from Stuart Orr, who is in the Global Freshwater Practice, and he has been with WWF for a good 15 years, and working with the private sector, really trying to figure out how to bring nature and water together, from water footprint to public policy engagement. And he's now part of the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council for Water. So long, if you can have the video, we can start moving towards conclusions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stuart Orr, WWF's Global Freshwater Lead, and it's my great pleasure to wrap up this webinar on accelerating adaptation through large-scale nature-based solutions. Climate change is impacting all of us, primarily through water. Indeed, our climate crisis is a water crisis. Wherever we live, we are increasingly at risk from extreme floods, droughts, storms, and wildfires. It's in the news every day. It's in the latest IPCC report, and it's only going to get worse. Of course, we have to prioritize steps to slash emissions and achieve net zero by 2050 to rein in climate change, but simultaneously, we must urgently and drastically scale up efforts to adapt and build resilience. Recent disasters, from historic floods in Europe and China to wildfires and mega drought in the United States, to the Parana and Paraguay rivers hitting record lows this year, are proof that climate change is here and that our societies and economies are not fit for our future of climate extremes. Indeed, for our present climate extremes. What is required is a substantial increase in climate finance for adaptation. So it's very welcome to see world leaders, including President Biden at the United Nations last month, pledging billions more to help countries adapt to climate change. Hopefully, other development banks will soon follow the lead of the African Development Bank, which is already committed to 50% of climate financing for adaptation. But there's no point in securing additional funding if there is no pipeline of projects ready to absorb it, which is why this webinar has been so important. It has shown the power of partnerships to develop ambitious, large-scale nature-based solutions that have the potential to tackle societal challenges and build the resilience of communities, cities, and countries. We've heard about reducing flood risk in Pakistan, boosting water and energy security in Zambia, tackling the sinking and shrinking of the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, restoring wetlands for urban resilience in Rwanda, and enhancing coastal resilience through healthy mangroves in Kenya. All of these potential projects are focused on water because climate is water, or as Salim El-Houk, director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development, said so clearly, like energy is to mitigation, water is to adaptation. And as my friend, Henk Ovink, International Water Envoy for the Netherlands, wrote recently, it's not just a case of building back better from the COVID pandemic. To strengthen adaptation and resilience, the world must also build back bluer. So what's next? We need to take these projects to the next level, developed in partnership with governments, civil society, financial institutions, private sector, and communities. We need to ensure that they are funded and implemented. For this, we need more partners and, of course, investors. So together with the GCA, I'm urging you to join us in the GCA Water Adaptation Communities. There you will find opportunities to help drive these projects forward, as well as collaborate on other large-scale NBS initiatives, since these are just the tip of the iceberg. Together, we need to develop pipelines full of projects, not just across Africa and Asia, but in Latin America and the Pacific, and indeed, as evidenced by recent disasters, right here in Europe as well. Together, everything is possible. And with that, I'll bring this webinar to a close. Thank you to the GCA for co-hosting this webinar with WWF, and thank you to all the speakers for their inspiring contributions. And thanks, of course, to all of you listening around the world. Remember, please join the GCA Water Adaptation Communities, and together we can create, fund, and implement a pipeline of ambitious nature-based solutions that will accelerate adaptation and build more resilient societies, economies, and ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you everybody for participating today in this webinar. He did a much better pitch than I was going to do on the Water Adaptation Community. I hope that you join. And then a huge thank to Ase Johannessen, who is the coordinator of the community, and to Alon and Abraham, who provided a lot of the logistical support today. Thank you so much to our panelists, to Regit, Masoud, Karel, Anirudh, and of course, Imelda for the comments today. The presentations and the video will be posted in the community. Please join us there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.